One of the things I've been most inspired by that I remark upon in the last several weeks of going and visiting a lot of these American Climate Corps programs around the country, which I've had the pleasure to do, is just to see in people's eyes that some days are hard and sometimes they might be working all by themselves. They could be working in a forest or on a floodplain or, on a computer all by themselves. But seeing them realize that they are doing this alongside tens of thousands of other people, they are not alone in this. They are part of something much larger than themselves, I think is one of the most inspiring things. And holding on to that as we move through the next year, 2, 5, 10 of the American Climate Corps is going to be really exciting.
Welcome to the Zenergy Podcast. I'm Karan Takhar, and today I'm speaking with Yasmeen Shaheen-McConnell, Senior Advisor for the American Climate Corps. We dive into how the Corps started, who can join, and how partners get involved. Yasmeen also shares inspiring moments and her vision for the Corps over the next decade. Stick around for a fun lightning round at the end, and big thanks to Yasmeen and her team. Now, hope you enjoy. Hello, Yasmeen. Welcome to the Zenergy Podcast. It is truly a privilege to have you on, and I'm super excited to learn about your own career journey as well as the impactful work of the American Climate Corps. But before we dive deep, I have a little warm-up with something fun. So if the American Climate Corps was a superhero team, what would its superpower be?
Oh gosh, well, Karan, it's so nice to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. I am overjoyed to be here, and I love your opener. What would our superpower be?
Kind of a curveball.
It is such a curveball. You know what I'm going to say, actually, is that I think it's going to be something related to harnessing energy. I think that it's not just, though, what you'd think of, not just solar energy, wind energy, the energy of water. I think a lot of people probably have that answer in your podcast. But it's the energy of people. I think our superpower is people power.
Mm-hmm.
We are an ambitious group here, and the Biden-Harris administration is committed to already putting 20,000 young people in American Climate Corps positions. We're 3/4 of the way there, and we can't do this without the power of young people. So I think our superpower is people.
Such a good superpower. And I've actually never asked that in a podcast interview. So I really appreciate you answering and would love to. Well, now every superhero has an origin story. Would love to hear the origin story of the American Climate Corps.
Okay.
And I know you joined the American Climate Corps relatively early in its launch. So was there a specific aha moment for you that made you realize, oh, I would really love to be a part of that initiative? And if so, could you just provide some insight into what your thought process was as you were exploring an opportunity with the Climate Corps?
Absolutely. So I'll start with the origin story of the American Climate Corps itself, and then weave my own in just a little bit, because I'm certainly not the most exciting part of it. But back before the president and vice president were elected, then candidate Biden was challenged by young people in the youth climate justice and jobs movement to commit to a policy called the Civilian Climate Corps at the time. It was something young people had been advocating for, not just because climate change is an incredible challenge that we all have to tackle together, and one young people in particular obviously are very rightfully concerned about, but also because young people wanted access to the good jobs of the future, to our changing economy. And so then candidate Biden, committed to creating the Civilian Climate Corps. And it was part of our administration, the Biden-Harris administration's day one executive orders on climate. And the president, vice president, and a lot of us in the administration remain very committed to ensuring that we delivered on behalf of the American people and young people on this issue. And while it wasn't specifically funded as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, it had a lot of support both going into that conversation and coming out of it from Congress and other folks across not just this administration, but across America. The president remains so committed to it that the Biden-Harris administration announced our intention to create the American Climate Corps using executive action a little over 1 year ago today. So I'm talking to you in mid-October, but the president announced his intention to create the American Climate Corps in September of 2023. And making sure that we deliver on that promise. And that's sort of what the origin of this comes out of. And I think it's really important to state that. So thank you for asking that question, because it is a direct response to what young people asked of and sort of demanded and held us accountable to in this administration. And I think it's important for all of us to see that government can work on behalf of young people as well. And so that's why the American Climate Corps was created. We also know that there's going to be millions of new jobs in the next decade created by the Inflation Reduction Act and our changing economies. And preparing people for those jobs that are going to exist is really important. And we knew that coming in. So that's a bit of the origin of how the American Climate Corps was created, or sort of why it was created. I started serving in the Biden-Harris administration on Inauguration Day. And we've been working through the whole government approach that we were challenged to do by this administration to create the American Climate Corps. And so while my background actually isn't in the climate movement or environmental education or anything like that, I have a different background. I wanted to be a part of this and figure out how the knowledge and expertise I had, the agency I work for, and the agencies I've worked with in this administration, how we can all join together in this whole of government approach to tackling the climate crisis, because everybody has a role to play regardless of what our backgrounds are.
100%. And that's really inspiring that just in 1 year already have managed to fill roughly like 1/3 of that $20,000 job creation goal.
The announcement was actually made in September, but we didn't launch the American Climate Corps till June. So we're only 4 months into the American Climate Corps.
Really?
And we announced last month that we had hit 15,000 people. So while we announced the American Climate Corps in September of 2023, it's actually only been in existence for like 4 months, which is really exciting.
That is exciting. And I think a good time to just talk about what the American Climate Corps exactly is and how you go about recruiting people, what the challenges have been, and just like how the process has taken shape over the last 4 months.
Absolutely. So the American Climate Corps is a Biden-Harris administration initiative to get 20,000 young people in the first year alone engaged in workforce development and national service opportunities that tackle the climate crisis today while preparing those young people for the clean energy and climate resilience jobs of the future. That's really, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do with the American Climate Corps. Those positions can totally range in what folks are working on at the time. They could be restoring our lands and waters, bolstering community resilience, deploying clean energy, advancing environmental justice, all these types of activities. But they do that as part of these awesome projects and programs in communities across the country, because we know that those, as you've heard, I'm sure before, those who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solutions. And we know that climate change and the future that we're building looks different in every community and every economy locally. And so what we've done is sort of build out this opportunity through this initiative for young people to participate in these programs and these opportunities and ensure that we're building not just that community resilience to climate change, but also the knowledge and tools that it takes as individuals to make a difference. And then knowing that people are going to come out of that wanting to pursue all different types of professions, but that they have this sort of select point in time opportunity to participate in the American Climate Corps, get paid to do it, and then go on to those good jobs moving forward that are really critical to the US economy and to fighting the climate crisis. And so that's sort of like what it means to serve in the American Climate Corps, is to do this position for a period of time, could be 3 months, could be 12 months, and get paid while you do it, and then go on to do any number of positions afterwards.
Got it. And what positions, I know you mentioned that there's a really broad range of positions out there, but structurally, how does it work? So has the administration partnered with private sector companies across the climate field who are working on the ground, or nonprofits or other organizations across the field. And essentially, from as I understand it, but could be wrong, would love to hear exactly how it takes shape. But essentially, the fellowship helps support these organizations, and it's paid for by the government, and then the organizations provide the experiential opportunities. Is that kind of how it works?
It was a good way. That was a good question, Karan, and I think you're right in some ways. And then in other ways, I'll talk through what it means to be in the American Climate Corps. So the American Climate Corps is a collection, first and foremost, of 8 federal agencies who together are committed to pursuing this initiative. So that's AmeriCorps, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Department of the Interior, Department of Labor, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency through the Department of Commerce, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and HUD, the Housing and Urban Development. And those 8 agencies together are committed to supporting this initiative. What that means is that we work both at an agency level and then at a nonprofit and state or local or tribal government level to partner to create these positions. So those positions might be with a federal agency. So I'll use the AmeriCorps NCCC Forest Corps program, which is a new program under the American Climate Corps as an umbrella that's run and operated by AmeriCorps, one of those 7 federal agencies, right? Then there are nonprofits on the ground that receive federal grants from from one of these agencies, right? So as an example, there's a program called Resilience Corps in Maine that I got to visit with recently, and they receive federal funds from several of the signatories of the ACC MOU, or Rocky Mountain Youth Corps, which is in New Mexico, that gets funding from several federal agencies. So those nonprofits on the ground are actually the ones running the programs. And then there are states that run their own Climate Corps programs as well, or city or tribal partners that have programs as well. And so those could be states like Colorado or Arizona or California that have these state climate corps. And those are sort of like all the different ways that people can serve in American Climate Corps positions. All the positions are funded by the public sector in some way, shape, or form. So as opposed to being sort of full-time private sector jobs that you're hired in and expected to perform for years on end, sort of as a job, this is an opportunity that's being funded by public or philanthropic or nonprofit dollars to serve in a position, workforce development or national service for a short period of time, 3 months to 12 months, sometimes up to 2 years, while you get that experience around a particular issue, topic, or prepare for a particular type of job of the future. And that's what serving in the American Climate Corps is like. Did that help answer your question?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying, because clearly I was pretty far off.
That's all right.
And
We're here to
appreciate
make
you walking
government,
through it.
to explain how government,
Do have
how
a
some of this
follow-up.
government program works.
Do have a follow-up. So if I'm
Sure.
understanding correctly, there are a few different partnerships, I mean, many different partnerships in play, even outside of the federal government. So we have the state and local, as you mentioned, and we have nonprofits.
Yeah.
And then also on the more like demand side for actual fellowships, then you have students or like recent grads or people earlier in their careers.
Yeah.
Is there any like cutoff in terms of how much experience someone can have before applying? That's one question. And then the second question is, as it pertains to the supply side, so actual positions for American Climate Corps fellows, how can organizations on the ground who want to partner with the American Climate Corps, if there is still a need to provide more openings, get in touch with you or someone from the team?
Great question. So the American Climate Corps is open to anyone, is the best way I'd say that. We're reaching people who tend to be earlier in their careers or considering a career transition through the American Climate Corps, but really we aren't setting any types of barriers or boundaries on people serving in the American Climate Corps. And I think it's important to say, because while some programs that we partner with who are American Climate Corps programs might have educational requirements like an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. It's not very many of them. So most programs are actually recruiting people no matter what their educational background is. And that is important to note because uh, we want to make sure that people feel included in the American Climate Corps. We know that people are going to come at this work and want this type of training or experience, maybe even if they aren't on the college track, right? And there's a ton of opportunities available for them to get this type of experience, make a difference in their communities, and think about what they want to do next or train for a particular job with the American Climate Corps. It's also open to people who might have had involvement with the justice system before, too, in many different ways. And again, some programs might have some barriers, like if you're working with children around what type of background you might have of justice involvement. But generally speaking, most programs are available to most people, regardless of justice involvement and educational attainment. Um, the types of positions really range. And so, like I said, there's a couple of them that might require a little bit more specialized experience. But I just mentioned Rocky Mountain Youth Corps, which I was just with in New Mexico. At one point, folks went around and they were asked what their favorite tool was to use. And I was learning so much about all the training these people are getting with all these different tools they have that I don't know how to use, right? And so there's a lot of different reasons why people are trained in the programs they are, both so they can make a specific difference and so they can be on a pathway to those jobs. Some people in different positions might earn their red cards as part of this, which gets you on a pathway to being a wildland fighter, which is a particular, which is a popular position for people serving in the American Climate Corps. So that type of thing. You asked me if organizations want to get engaged in the American Climate Corps or partner with us, what to do. And what they should do actually at this point in time is just reach out to us. Our email address is acc at AmeriCorps.gov. That's AmeriCorps.gov, AmeriCorps.gov. And we're happy to explore that partnership with them. And just so we're using the same language when we talk about this, those are like partners or programs that engage people. And people who serve in the American Climate Corps, we refer to as members. So they're members of the American Climate Corps while they're in it.
Very helpful context. And are there any particular traits you look for in members, people who are looking to apply for the American Climate Corps fellowships? And I think another interesting way to frame this question is, what interview questions can American Climate Corps potential members get in an interview? Are there any like unexpected questions that have come up during the interviews?
You mean like this one in my superpower? So because every position is so different and we have so many programs on the ground that people are ACC members with, every process is different, right? We don't control that at the federal level. And I think it's important for folks to know, like, we don't control that at the federal level because we asked the American people what they wanted to see out of the American Climate Corps, including a lot of young people. Thousands of young people showed up to these listening sessions that we had back in January of 2024. One of the things we learned was, like, in this moment, please don't recreate the wheel. Like, if there's great opportunities out there, let's make sure we just elevate those. And so folks should go to acc.gov or climatecorps.gov. Either one will get you to our website. So that's acc.gov. And you can find all types of positions there. And instead of creating sort of one master application that would sort of ask every single question that could possibly be out there for every single position in the American Climate Corps, if you go to apply for the position, it'll take you directly to the website of the organization that would hire you. And they'll ask you the questions that are specific to that, right? So for some people, it's like, are you comfortable working outdoors in a hot climate for 6 or 8 hours at a time? For others, it's like, do you know how to use GIS or Excel? Those are the kinds of things that we know are activities that people learn. A lot of programs, though, will train you for those types of things. So while there are some questions that people might get in interviews, why are you interested in this? What's your background? What drives you to do this? Are you comfortable in these scenarios? Again, I think it's really important for your listeners to know that you get training in these positions. So I've met with members who didn't know anything about GIS when they started, but they've been trained in GIS as members of the American Climate Corps through the program they serve in. Or they might not have picked up a chainsaw before they started, but now they're masters at it. And I think that that's sort of like an exciting and important thing for folks to know. there really isn't one trait that someone has to have to serve in the American Climate Corps. It's not even, to be frank, like wanting a job that tackles the climate crisis. Are you a person who's like believes you have a part to play in the future that we're building together? Fantastic, sign up.
Got it. So just to clarify, no one will be asked if they can teleport or
Exactly.
they
Not
can
yet,
be
at least.
friends. Not
I
yet.
can't promise for I can't promise what the 2034 American Climate Corps looks like. But the 2024 American
Yeah,
Climate Corps,
seriously.
not yet.
Lots of changes underway. And I'm always really interested in learning about how some of these larger initiatives at the federal level are deployed and actually implemented on the ground because, as of course, there's been so much federal legislation in the climate space, really inspiringly and impactfully, that has been passed in the past couple of years. And because they're such huge initiatives, the actual deployment can be like a pretty complex process, both in terms of like the federal government trying to distribute that funding, and then also like companies or nonprofits or people being able to actually tap into that funding to convert it to on the ground action. And I think the American Climate Corps is a really interesting example because it's, again, such an ambitious goal, getting 20,000 jobs allocated. And you've already managed to allocate a significant portion in the past 4 months. So could you just talk a little bit about the actual process? Like, what have been some of the challenges that you've experienced in being able to implement the American Climate Corps initiative? And also, like, what has really inspired you during this work?
One of the things that's so, you said you worked in government a little bit. One of the things that's really exciting as an opportunity in working in government is helping make it work better on behalf of the American people. And so I'd sort of answer your question in a couple of different ways while acknowledging that these things can be complex, certainly. And in this administration, we've had incredible investments um, in projects and people across America, including the Inflation Reduction Act, and it can be complex. So I'd say two things. The first is that we are taking a whole of government approach to this, which means it's the onus of responsibility to some degree is on us in this administration to work together to make it easier for our partners in outside of government and for young people who want to serve in these programs. That's why our 8 federal agencies are working together. And we've signed an MOU stating sort of what we're working towards in this initiative for the American Climate Corps. So instead of having everybody come to one agency and say, well, what do you think the ACC is? Or another agency, what do you think the ACC is, right? We have this shared document. And I like to joke that getting an MOU signed by 8 federal agencies is actually quite a feat in itself. And we're really proud of that. It's certainly not the thing that most Americans are probably going to be so interested in, but it does help with that implementation piece you're asking about, right? To have us aligned around that, I think is really important. And then I think the second thing is inside government, we're doing work to release funds that are available to organizations that know a little bit more about this and have some experience running some of these programs so that they can help create these positions, right? And that way, if you're a person who is interested in serving, for example, in the new Energy Communities AmeriCorps program, which if this comes out before the end of the year, folks is still recruiting right now as we speak in mid-October for folks to serve in energy communities across the country as those communities grapple with and take on their energy transition. And those types of positions, right, are created not just through that program, but for AmeriCorps and CCC Forest Corps, right, to train the next generation of wildland fighter fighters, or Working Lands Climate Corps, or the recently announced Environmental Justice Climate Corps program. All these programs, right, are ones that we're working to create at the federal government, but with partners in the nonprofit world and in the Youth Corps and Core Network and Core Program world to make it easier for people to do that. So I acknowledge sort of like that this thing that government can be complex and these huge investments can be sort of hard to access. But what we're trying to do is make sure that young people know they can go to acc.gov, they can search for a position, are they interested in energy communities like the one I mentioned? Great, search energy communities, you'll find it, right? And it'll take you right there. So hopefully it'll be a little bit easier on the experience level. I think one of the things that has surprised me as I've gotten through this process and I've gotten the real pleasure of working in this world for a little while is that I remember talking to someone about offshore winds at one point and sort of like the importance of that. And I saw their eyes kind of glaze over a little bit to some degree. And it's not because our average Americans or my brothers or cousins or anybody can't understand what offshore winds are. It's because for a lot of people, it's just not necessarily, they don't like feel and see it tangibly in their day to day life. And the American Climate Corps is an opportunity to make that change, to make that investment, to work with your hands, to work on a computer, to work alongside other people, to do that together right now that doesn't have such a high technological barrier to entry. And I think that's one of the things that surprised me is like there's a real drive out there for people to participate in this together. And I think that helping folks in the climate space and in government understand that has been a unique role to play, but it's a space in which the American Climate Corps really can exist to make that real for people.
Makes a lot of sense. And on the implementation side, so there are people who work all across the climate field who listen to this podcast, ranging from early career professionals, which is the larger majority, to people who have been working in the space for many years. And within that, there are people who work on the public sector side. So are there any best practices that you have found reflecting on this incredible experience helping to launch such a major initiative that you think they could learn from or draw from in their own work?
Oh gosh, much like we need to build communities and economies that are resilient, I'd say that resilience is the one thing that I would really suggest that other people dig deep to find a lot of time. Making, like it's intimidating sometimes to see these projects or programs or to look at the scale of government or the scale of the challenges, right? And just say like I'm not sure we can figure that out. One of the best things about working in government is day in and day out that you are answerable to the American people, and not just some of the American people, all of the American people. And I think when you develop a resilience to things going, having a hard day here or a tough day there, and knowing that you get up and you do it again because people depend on you to do your job. I think that that's the real advice I would say. In America, we can do big things. We have before. I think one of the things we like to tell people is the FDR administration's initial CCC is what inspires to some degree the American Climate Corps. And we can do big things in America, not just then, like we're doing them now. And this American Climate Corps looks very different than the original CCC, not just because the challenges we're facing are different than they were almost 100 years ago, because the American people were different. Like this isn't just men, and mostly white men, who are showing up for this. Like the world is changing, and Americans look different. We have different needs today, and young people are, demanding things of us and holding us accountable to those in this generation and this future that we have together. So we can harken back in some ways to see the big things we've done in the past, but adapt them to what we have moving forward and staying resilient to the tides coming in and out on those, and making sure that we just keep swimming is the most important thing here.
Thank you for sharing. And wow, this interview has flown by. I just saw that we only have a few minutes left and would like to wrap up with getting your perspective on how you see the American Climate Corps evolving over the next 5 to 10 years. And then I'd like to finally conclude with a fun lightning round.
Oh gosh. Okay. What I would say in terms of the evolution of the American Climate Corps is that we know today there are all kinds of challenges that we are facing. There are also all types of solutions, right? Clean energy efficiency, urban agriculture, environmental education, flood and storm and wildfire response, right? Reforestation, all these types of issues. And they're not going away, right? They're not going to go away. So as we think about the next 5 to 10 years, how do we make sure we invest in people and people invest in solutions together that are going to tackle those? So while the president and vice president challenged us to engage 20,000 people in the first year of the American Climate Corps, They've challenged us to ensure we're engaging 50,000 people a year by 2030. And that's an ambitious goal. So I'd say that's a key thing that we're looking at when we think about the future and what the next several years look like. We know that we need people who will have direct impact and action on the effects of the climate crisis and on our local environments and on our local economies. We also know that people who serve in these programs, like I said, can become more resilient to the challenges we face every day. Those can be climate challenges. They can also be workforce challenges, right? They can also just be life challenges. And ensuring that we're doing that together, I think is really critical. And then I'd say as we look towards 2030, one of the things I've been most inspired by that I remark upon in the last several weeks of going and visiting a lot of these American Climate Corps programs around the country, which I've had the pleasure to do, is just to see in people's eyes that like some days are hard and sometimes they might be working all by themselves. They could be working in a forest or on a floodplain or, on a computer all by themselves. But seeing them realize that they are doing this alongside tens of thousands of other people, they are not alone in this. They are part of something much larger than themselves, I think is one of the most inspiring things. And holding on to that as we move through the next year, 2, 5, 10 of the American Climate Corps is going to be really exciting and impactful.
Super powerful, and really excited to see how the Climate Corps continues to develop. And now for the lightning round.
Okay.
Question one. If you could have a suit, no. So how many climate focused jobs do you hope to create by 2030, which you kind of just touched upon, but do you have a specific number?
Yeah. And so these are positions in the American Climate Corps, remember, as opposed to sort of like jobs in the economy that we're spurring through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is, millions of jobs. I think independent research shows over 1.5 in a decade, but new job. But I will say that by 2030, by the end of this year, actually, Karan, we're going to hit 20,000 young people in the American Climate Corps, and by 2030, 50,000. So that's what we're aiming for.
That is a
Come
lot.
join us.
Yes, seriously. I highly recommend. As I was mentioning to you before, I worked at the Department of Energy sort of through a similar, it was a fellowship, and it was like such an incredible experience. So highly recommend joining the American Climate Corps. And we'll link to all of the website URLs that you've mentioned.
Great.
Into most unexpected skill a Climate Corps member has picked up.
What did somebody say the other day? Oh gosh, they said a cutter. That's the most unexpected skill. It was a cutter. It is something that you use out in, as she was clearing a burn scar, actually, out inland. And the skill that she had picked up was using a cutter. And I was like, all right, I need more information. So that's the first one that I will say.
Sounds like a unexpected but very cool skill. Most rewarding aspect of seeing these jobs filled?
I think I said this, but it's like young people who know now that they're doing this alongside other people. Like that is really the most rewarding thing I think I've seen. I was talking to a young woman who brought her talent with a background in film, actually, to her position, which was educating people around installing and using tide monitoring to ensure that we're learning more about the prevalence and increase of floods and how to prepare for them more effectively. And she used her background in film in that, and like is part of the American Climate Corps. So I'd say see the one of the most inspiring things is just like see people bring their whole selves to this and know that they're part of it in an incredible way, making a difference.
Best piece of advice for someone passionate about climate action but unsure how to get involved?
The hardest thing is starting. After that is just momentum. Do one thing. Just do one thing. And once you start, it'll be hard to stop. Doesn't matter what your background is. Like I said, my background's not in conservation or environmental education or anything like that. But once you start, it's hard to stop. So say take a deep breath, press go, and we'll see you on the field.
And finally, reflecting on your incredible career, spanning across climate, but also outside of climate. If you could go back in time and give your 25-year-old self one piece of professional advice, does anything come to mind?
I'd say such a good question. I think if I am 25, the thing I'd say is things are going to go wrong from time to time. And the most important thing to do is keep your cool, and know that it'll be do your best. Do your best and it'll be okay. And if one thing goes wrong, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. And I remember making a big mistake when I was 25 years old about something, and I asked for help and I trusted people to help me. I thanked them for their assistance on the other side of it. I learned my lesson and I just kept going. So I'd say it's okay. If something goes wrong, don't worry about it. We're still really glad to have you.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much, Yasmeen, for taking the time. Really appreciate learning about the American Climate Corps and all the incredible work you're doing in the field. Grateful that you took the time. And yeah, we'll definitely keep you posted on everything.
Awesome, Karan. Thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to talk to you. And thank you for the platform you've created for people to learn about this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for checking out the Zenergy podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate and subscribe to the podcast. It would mean so much to me and the rest of the team. We release episodes every Thursday, so stay tuned for all new episodes featuring industry leaders building a cleaner, greener future for us all. See you next time.